Justice served in an honest fight. True crime tales till the verdict's right. Solving more than just trivial quests, where sentences rule at the defense rests.
No, I encouraged him to get tested for poisoning.
You encouraged him to get tested for poison.
Yes.
Okay. So that's where that idea came from, was from you?
Well, he said at one point that he thought she was poisoning him, and I encouraged him to go to the doctor. And he said that was embarrassing.
When did you ever, have you remarried? Have you moved on since Gary? Okay.
Well, I mean, I never remarried. I didn't want to remarry.
Right. Did you still love Gary?
As a person, yes.
Okay. Well, I'm talking about as, wishing he'd be your romantic.
No, never.
And as far as being in the hospital and you allegedly not having cell phone communication, I mean, Gary always had his phone with him, yes?
I think so, yes.
Right. And he was always texting you and calling you.
Yeah.
Emailing you.
Right.
Constantly.
Well, I mean, not constantly.
I mean, it's kind of absurd to think that, if I go to the hospital, the first two people I'm going to call is my wife and my paralegal.
Right.
Because they are the two most important people in my life. They run my life. So you would have had communication with him, because he would have had to have talked to you about, hey, we've got this case coming up. We're going to have to move that closing. So that would be reasonable, yes?
Yes, but I was told he wasn't allowed to have his phone.
Who told you that?
I think Melody said she wanted him to rest, so she didn't give him his phone.
Well, then that'd be pretty reasonable, too. If he's trying to rest in a hospital, he's had a spell, maybe he doesn't need to work.
Right.
Well, but you insinuated that she somehow built this barrier between you and cut him off and hid him in the hospital away from you.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I didn't have any contact with him during that time.
So I may have one moment, Your Honor.
Well, yes.
How was that?
Well, I mean, he was obviously not happy about it. He, especially since there were multiples. I remember the first time, and I don't know that this turned into an affair. I just remember him leaving office sick one time. This is at least 25 years ago, because she got an email from some man talking about her legs and her red painted toenails.
And that was a long time ago.
A long time ago.
Did Gary ever express to you his state of mind when it came to if he were to pass away?
I know that he talked about changing his beneficiary information, that he did not want her to get another penny of his money because of the way she had wasted it and kept cheating.
Did he ever express to you his, and when I say state of mind, the way he felt at the moment, at the time, as if something were to happen to him?
Well, we had a conversation about, I said, you need to go be tested for poisoning. If you don't want to go to our regular doctor, we have the same doctor. And obviously I couldn't tell the doctor to test him. I said, go to a different doctor. He went out on smoke break and he came back and he said, well, you'll know what to tell Dateline if I die mysteriously.
And that was
that Melody
kind of
had.
Unjust in a way.
Yes.
That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, so we were.
Moment, please. Gary would keep actually, and whether for medical purposes or for his own personal purposes, because he's a very organized person, right?
Yes.
That he would actually keep a log of his spells. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And would he turn that over to his doctors?
No.
Would he actually go to the doctor?
He did.
Okay. What was the theory on what was causing these spells from the actual doctor?
They couldn't find anything.
They checked his blood sugar.
They checked everything.
Did he mention to him? Let me slow down. Did they ever mention that you know that, of course, he's a rather large guy and he was in very bad shape?
Mhm.
Was that ever a possibility?
Well, he was on blood pressure medicine or whatever.
Blood pressure medicine.
Mhm.
How many packs a day would he smoke?
Hard to say. Too
Could
many.
you guess?
I think he would maybe smoke 2 or 3 every time he would go down, which was at least once an hour.
So 2 or 3 cigarettes per smoke break
Right.
every hour.
Probably.
Okay.
Mhm.
And that's a fact. I mean, you were with him for so many years, you
Right.
would know this.
Right.
And he would drink Mountain Dew constantly, yes?
Yes.
So he was not in good shape.
No.
And he would just lay down at the office for hours sometimes.
Well, he would fall asleep in his chair sometimes, and then other times he would go and just not be able to hold his head up and would sleep on a sofa.
And he'd been at the office for hours by that time, right?
Usually.
Right? So that afternoon, he would have a spell.
Right.
Hadn't been home.
Sometimes he would have the spells at home and not make it in.
But those days that he was at the office, he hadn't been home. Melody hadn't stopped by and given him a special drink or anything like
Right.
that. He just had a spell.
Right.
Okay. That's all I have.
I have nothing further questions.
All right, let me sit down. All right, y'all are doing outstanding at breaking right at lunchtime. All right. We'll take, let's try to get back up and run at 1:15.
1:15, Judge?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Swapping around the seats on us. Uh-oh. All right, real quick, there was a short issue that came up. Nothing wrong, just I want to make sure y'all know what the rules are, and if something happens, you let us know, which is what happened this afternoon during lunch break. One of the jurors bumped into, it's probably no secret which one of you it was because he got called out of the room, but bumped into someone that he knew that worked at the district attorney's office, and they chatted, and she saw his juror badge and said, "Oh, you're on the jury," and "Yeah, I'm going to go get coffee. You want a coffee? No, you can't have I can't talk to you because I work for the DA's office," kind of thing. So that's, again, why we have you wear your badges during lunch. There's many reasons for it, but that's one of the best examples of it. And if anything like that happens, immediately remove yourself from the situation. Let us know about it. We'll take it up. Odds are it's not that big a deal, but we'll address it appropriately and go from there. All right. With that, Ms. Frankis, you can go ahead.
Judge, state calls Patrick Clark.
Right.
Mr. Clark, if you could stand and raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please have a seat and introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Patrick Joseph Clark.
Where is it that you work, Mr. Clark?
I work at Vern Foreman.
What I guess, branch, which practice
Oh,
of Burnett Foreman?
I work in our Mobile, Alabama office, but I was in our Atlanta office for about 22 years.
22 years? And do you know Gary Farris?
I do.
How do you know Gary Farris?
Gary and I mean, we first met, back before I became a Burnett Foreman attorney. We were actually on the opposite side of real estate transactions and just got to know each other over the years. And at a certain point in time, Gary had talked to me about coming to work with Burnett Foreman, and at a certain point in time, I did that. So we practiced together, up until his death.
Can you describe your relationship with Mr. Farris?
Yeah, Gary was a good friend of mine, and while we didn't spend a lot of time together outside the office, and there's various reasons for that, we each had our own lives, and people who live in the Atlanta area, you know how it is commute wise, and we work so much that whatever free time that we had, weekends, et cetera, we generally were spending with our families, et cetera. But we would get together, play golf, sometimes go out and shoot ski. I think we went on a couple of dove hunts together, but most of our time was spent as friends in the office, going to lunch when it was appropriate. We'd go out to dinner with clients sometimes, and et cetera. But I considered Gary to be a very good friend of mine.
Did you ever hang out with Gary's family?
Some, yes.
How well did you know the rest of the family?
I knew who all they were. I mean, I knew all their names. I knew Melody. I knew, Chris and Scott and Amanda and Emily. Went to Chris's wedding. Went to Emily's wedding. Gary would tell me what was going on with his kids sometimes, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I knew the family.
Can you explain to the jury Gary's work ethic, or how often you guys have to work in your line of work?
Yeah, we work a lot. We are commercial real estate transactional lawyers, and we don't do any residential real estate work. It's all commercial real estate. And our practice primarily was representing institutional type lenders in commercial real estate transactions, construction loans, permanent loans, various different kinds of properties, multifamily apartment complexes, industrial buildings, office towers. We oftentimes did what we call syndicated transactions, which involve multiple banks, high dollar, high volume transactions involving what you would consider to be very sophisticated real estate developers, very sophisticated lenders, and it required a lot of time and effort to get those deals done. A lot of time and effort to get those deals done.
Would you work holidays frequently?
Yes, definitely. Our clients were very demanding, justifiably so, and our work ethic and was always we didn't take the time that was needed to accomplish what it was that they were engaging us to do. And our practice, so a little bit better to understand that, is our practice was nationwide in scope. We closed deals all across the United States. And again, we were dealing with financial institutions in New York and Boston and California and other places. So oftentimes there would be time frames where you'd be doing a transaction out in California, maybe 2 or 3 hours behind us, depending on what time of the year it was. So it wasn't unusual for us to get on the phone with the client 10 o'clock our time, 6, 7 o'clock their time.
To your knowledge, did Gary Farris have any professional enemies?
No.
Um,
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to try to explain that, because we're not criminal defense lawyers. We're not plaintiffs' attorneys. We don't go into the courtroom. I've been in the courtroom one time in my entire career. And I think Gary probably was in the courtroom a little bit more, but he used to practice in bankruptcy law. So he was probably in there in that regard. But no, our work, our transactions always involved people on every aspect of the transaction who were trying to accomplish the same goal, which was to get a deal done.
Would Gary share with you information about his family and what was going on during certain times in his life?
Not really.
Was he kind of a private person?
Very.
Was he proud of his kids?
Yeah. To the extent that we talked about them.
What about Scott?
Yeah, I remember kind of the first time I ever met Scott. I guess he was younger, maybe in his teens. And I think the first time I ever met him, I had lunch with him and Gary. And he struck me as a young kid. And then I guess he kind of had different jobs. I think I remember that he was selling cars at one time. I think he worked as an auto mechanic, if I'm not mistaken. And then at a certain point in time, he decided to go into the military. And I remember how proud Gary was of that. Very much so.
Were you someone that the family reached out to when his remains were found on July 5th?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to speak with Melody that day?
No.
When did you speak with Melody about what happened on July 5th?
My recollection is I talked to Melody not too long after that, and I couldn't tell you exactly what I mean in terms of time by not too long after that. For obvious reason being it's 6 years ago.
Sure.
But I do remember that I did talk to Melody. I can remember I was sitting in my office in Mobile, and my phone rang, and I looked down, and it said Melody Farris, and I was a little bit surprised, but she called me in my office.
And what was it that she was calling you about?
She called me and asked me if I could provide any assistance or information about helping her, I guess, obtain or get access to Gary's capital contribution in our law firm.
What is a capital contribution?
Well, a capital contribution, so in law firms, you have different levels of people who work in a law firm. And our firm is a pretty large firm. We've got 19 different offices, but there's different organizational structures, organizational funds. But the way that our firm works is you have two levels of partners. You have what's referred to as equity partners, and then you have what's referred to as income partners. And then you have associates, right? So the hierarchy is in terms of the firm structure itself, the equity partners are the owners of the law firm. So as if you owned a construction company and you're the owner. Income partners and associates are basically employees of the law firm. So they're W-2 employees. So our law firm, if there's profits at the end of the year, the equity partners share in the profits. So a capital contribution is the amount of money that as the owner or equity partner in the law firm that you're required to put in on an annual basis, et cetera, to maintain a certain level of capital for expansion, for needs to meet, upgrades in computer systems and so on and so forth. So it's basically a slug of money that's put in by the owners that's there and available for certain things.
And at any time, do you receive that contribution back throughout the year?
The only time that you receive it back is when you're no longer an equity partner.
Was Gary?
But you do have to put it in. The opposite's not true. You got to put it in every year.
Right. So. Was Gary a partner?
Yeah, Gary was an equity partner.
And did you continue to chat with Melody on the phone after she asked about that?
I did for a short period of time, yes.
What was it that you and her spoke about?
After I had talked with Melody, right, as she asked me about the capital contributions and assisting and trying to get it, and I indicated to her that I would do what I could. I really didn't have any knowledge about that because I've never been involved in having to get a capital contribution back. But I took the opportunity to ask Melody, what do they think happened? And she answered me.
What did she say?
She didn't really respond, in my opinion, to my question. She basically relayed to me, I guess if I think back on it now, what was going on the morning of the 4th of July. And what she told me was that she got up early in the morning or sometime in the morning, and she was blowing off, I guess, the leaves on either the driveway or somewhere around the house with a blower. And she finished that up. And then I remember her distinctly saying, and I know that Gary was there because I could smell cigarette smoke, right? And then she got prepared because she was going up to, I guess, Lake Lanier to spend the day with one of her children, and my recollection is it was her daughter Amanda. And she headed up to the lake.
And did she mention anything about if she went anywhere else before the lake?
Yeah, and I remember this conversation pretty vividly because it just struck me as unusual. She said, and on the way to the lake, I stopped at, my recollection was Target, and I bought a chair. And then she said something that really kind of, and she said, and I've got the receipt for that. And I went up to the lake, stayed up at the lake, came back home. She had two girls with her. I think one of them was her granddaughter, and one of them was a friend of her granddaughter's. Got back home, went straight to the bedroom and stayed in there the rest of the night because they were tired and they were watching movies. And that was basically the extent of the conversation.
Did you ask her what she did that day, or was this unprompted?
It was unprompted. I didn't ask her what she did that day.
Mr. Clark, that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Clark. My name is John Luke Weaver, and I represent Melody. Few quick questions. Based on what you just said, did you not call law enforcement in this case? Do you remember that?
I spoke to law enforcement.
Like you called them. You had something. Yes, sir.
I spoke to law enforcement. I think it was the week after the 5th. I called and spoke with a detective who was the lead detective on the case. And I told him who I was. I told him what I did. I told him that he and Gary and I did the same kind of work.
Sure.
And the reason I did that is because when most people think about lawyers, they think about people who spend time in the courtroom and people who spend time involved in litigation, et cetera. And I called him because I had become aware that the incident after finding Gary had become a homicide investigation. And I wanted to tell the detective, look, what you have to do, and I told him, I said, I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, but you need to know what it is we do. And we spend all of our time on the telephone, and we spend all of our time sending emails. So what you need to do is you need to look at our firm's email system and find out when the last time that Gary sent an email was. And if there's nothing after that, that's where you need to start. And that's what I told him. So that's when I contacted law enforcement. I never said anything to law enforcement about the conversation that I subsequently had with Melody until I was interviewed a month or so ago.
Do you remember when you called Detective Hayes also that there was something, you had a conversation with Chris, that there were some things that concerned you and you brought that up to Hayes? Do you remember that?
I don't know what.
You were discussing something to the effect of you had a conversation with Chris and some of the knowledge and things that he knew, you just thought, well, I think that's kind of concerning and I think you need to know about that, Detective Hayes. Do you remember that at all?
Possibly I did. I don't know that I'm sitting here trying to think about that. I talked to Detective Hayes. Can't remember how extensively I talked with him about the conversations I'd had with Chris. I had gotten a lot of my information
From Chris?
Right.
Right.
Because Chris contacted me to basically let me know what happened to his dad. I wasn't in Atlanta at that time. I had already moved out of Atlanta to Mobile, and he was kind of telling me what happened, and to a certain extent asking me, what do you think we should do here? And so I relayed to Detective Hayes everything that people had told me.
Sure. But you didn't bring up any of this conversation with Ms. Farris.
I did not bring that conversation up with anyone until, like I said,
About a month ago.
The first time I talked to Detective Hayes, my recollection was the last time I talked to Detective Hayes. And nobody in between that period of time until a month or so ago ever got in touch with me. So I guess to a certain degree, it was kind of out of sight, out of mind. Maybe I should have called them, but I didn't.
But you can't remember, would it help to listen to the recording of your phone call?
Sure.
To refresh your memory?
Yeah. I mean, again, it was 6 years ago, and I don't doubt what you're saying. I don't remember. But I do remember what I was striving to do when I talked to Detective Hayes was to relay information to him that I thought would be helpful in the investigation.
We might need just a minute to get that together.
Before we go down that road.
No.
All right, y'all step out. Way to get information from over there to over here.
In the future.
In the year 2000, we'll be able to do that. In the year 2000. I'm going to make you all come to the technology conference with me in December. You might want to know where it is, and then you might change your mind. Mr. Focus had something to do with it, so sound. Well, it's not on the displays, so that's the problem. Yeah, well, it's got to be up. There we go. Now try it. All right, let's pause it and tell them what you're doing.
At this time, I'm playing a recording that you made of the phone call that you made to Detective Hayes to help refresh your memory. And you judge, I mean, if you want, I don't have this timestamp in the transcript of this, so I'm going to move it kind of forward. It's towards the end of the interview, I believe. Play the whole thing. 17 minutes. What's that? I don't have it admitted, but we'll call this Clark 1.
Gary was my law partner and my friend, and he and I'm assuming, I know that the remains have not been identified, but I'm assuming that that's what we're talking about. Gary's oldest son, Chris, called me on July 5th in the afternoon, and after I had heard the news from two of our partners in our Atlanta office, and by the way, I practiced in Atlanta for the last 25 years. I just recently moved out of town to one of our other offices. So I'm somewhat familiar with Gary's property and very familiar with Gary's family, his children, so on and so forth. But anyway, Chris called me on Thursday afternoon and he said, I guess you've heard that my father has passed away. And I said, yeah, Chris, I heard, and I'm so sorry, so on and so forth. And we were just kind of chatting. He was like, I'm trying to figure out what to do. I want to do what my dad would want me to do, so on and so forth. And then during the course of that conversation, we're talking about his father's death. He made at least one comment that kind of made me think, well, why did he say that? And which was, my parents have been having problems, which I knew. Gary was a very personal person when it came to his personal life, so he didn't share a lot, but you spend so much time with somebody, you pick up on things and so on and so forth. So I thought that was an odd statement during the course of the conversation. When we were talking about his dad passing away, what he should do and how he should take care of things, that's how his dad wanted to do, so on and so forth. But that was kind of the gist of that conversation. So I hung up and then came into the office the next day. Chris called me back on Friday morning, and we started talking again. And it was at that point in time, see, we didn't know what had actually happened. And when I say we, I'm talking about people at our law firm and myself and so on and so forth. We all assumed that Gary had passed away from a heart attack. We know that he had some medical issues, so on and so forth. So during the course of that conversation, Chris started had seen Gary on July 4th, and that they all went to the lake and came back and still no one had seen him. And then the next day, which would have been the 5th, one of the grandchildren asked where Gary was, and that's when they started looking for him. And his car was there the whole time. His car keys were there the whole time. And Chris said that he and his brother Scott and Gary's wife Melody started looking around and eventually made their way to a point on the property where, and I don't know if it was a permanent burn pit or something else, but a place where they burned things. And Chris then said a couple of things that really made me, and this is why I'm calling you. First of all, he said, my mother went directly to the pit. I felt like she took us directly there. My brother Scott started stirring around in the pit and said, we need to call 911. Don't look in there. So that's what they did. And then, and this is what I found to be really unusual, because, and look, I'm not a police officer, I'm not an investigator, et cetera, but, you know, I watch enough shows on TV to at least think, you know, I have some kind of idea what you guys go through in these investigations. Chris told me, he said, and they told me, he didn't say who they was, they told me that they found a rib bone that had a bullet in it or had been struck by a bullet, that it was a 38 caliber bullet, and that there's a 38 caliber weapon that was on the property that I guess belonged to them that was missing. And I thought about that, and I was thinking to myself, well, during the course of an investigation, I wouldn't think that the people doing the investigation are going to share that kind of information with someone. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just, you know, playing, you know, television detective or whatever. But I would think that especially if you were one of the people who was on the property, that that's not something that they're going to share with you. So I found that to be odd that he told you that. Maybe I'm just dreaming things up. Maybe I'm conjuring things up. I don't know. The more I thought about it, the more I was thinking, well, maybe I better tell somebody about that.
Yeah, and there were probably 15, 20 investigators there at any one time, and Scott was
You
actually the
whole
one
thing,
that
or
pointed out to us,
Part out.
when I say us, detectives, that the gun was missing. Scott had discovered the gun a couple weeks ago.
Mhm.
During the course of this, he went back to find it, and couldn't. So that's how Chris would have known the gun was missing. And
Okay.
we have not identified the caliber of the bullet, so Chris might be assuming it's a 38 because the 38 is missing. So,
And again, detective, I you know, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody.
we do appreciate
I'm
it.
just-
I appreciate the phone call, and I was just trying, you know, that might explain that.
The other thing that Chris told me, and again, you know, I'm hesitant to tell you this, but everything is that, you know, he told me that he was 95.8% sure that his mother did this. And I said, well, Chris, you know, they'll investigate. I'm sure they'll figure it out, hopefully sooner rather than later. So I don't know whether he relayed that to you guys or not. That's what he told me. So those were the kind of conversations. And I had one more conversation with him after that, which was more along the lines of, he indicated to me, I guess, that they had all hired attorneys and so on and so forth. And I have not heard from him since. I'm assuming his attorney probably told him he doesn't need to be talking to anybody. The other thing that I was thinking about, and I wanted to relay to you guys, and hopefully this will be helpful. Again, not trying to do your job or not trying to play, you know, detective. What Gary and I do, we're commercial transaction lawyers. We don't go in the courtroom. We're not people who we deal with primarily with banks, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, BBVA Compass. We represent.
Does that refresh your memory? Okay.
All right. Are we going back in?
Yes, Your Honor.
Warm water over there. It is barely comfortable in here. I am burning up. I'm about to turn my fan on. No, you touched. I turned it down in the office already. I can feel the warm air blowing from the. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as we get started back, I'm going to take this opportunity just to remind y'all the things I've been telling y'all. And this just the reason I'm doing it is just because it refreshed my memory as we were doing it. And I figure it's a good time just to have a little chat with y'all again. Normally, when we send y'all in the back, it's very unlikely that you're going to interact with anyone who knows what happened while y'all were in the back in the jury room. Unfortunately, with the coverage of this case, there are many sites in which you can view the proceedings that are going on right now. And so it is critically important, and that's why you cannot talk to anyone about the case, because they may be watching the case and they see you're a juror, they're going to say something, and especially going to want to talk to you about something that happened outside your presence. And there's a reason it's happening outside your presence, because the rules of evidence, although they may seem strange and arcane, and to some extent they are, there are a reason for the rules, and that's why we follow the rules. And so when we're sending you out on the what's about to happen right here, and I'm just going to tell you what kind of happened right here without going into the specifics, but as y'all left, there was a phone conversation with the witness and a detective, and so that was played to the witness so the witness could refresh his recollection. But that's the process. Instead of playing you the message, that's the proper process in doing it. And because it's a recording, we can't show it to him and have him review it, etc. So there may be things that are not otherwise admissible, and that's why we do it outside your presence. And that may come up from time to time and will continue to happen throughout the course of the trial. So that's the whole reason for that, and that's why it's critically important that you not talk to anyone about the case whatsoever. All right, with all that, Mr. Weaver, go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. So after listening to the recording, your memory has been refreshed, yes?
Yes.
All right, and you previously told the jury that you called because your primary purpose of the call, or the only purpose of the call, was to discuss, the nature of being a transactional lawyer. But there was a first part to that phone call, and could you tell the jury what that is?
Well,
Let's contain that too. And I asked you, what did you want to call and relay about Chris that you found to be concerning?
I don't know that I was just necessarily calling about Chris, but what I was calling about was things that had been relayed to me from Chris that I found to be concerning under the circumstances based on where the matter was at the time.
Which would have been the 6th, I believe, Friday.
So my recollection is that, and actually, thank you for playing that, because it reminded me that the 5th was a Thursday.
Correct. And yes, sir, we have a calendar right here to look at to refresh
Right,
your memory.
not Friday. I think I said Friday earlier, but it was actually, so Tuesday was the 3rd, Wednesday was the 4th, the 5th was the day that they found Gary's body.
Correct.
And so, and I'm sorry, what was your question again?
My question is what did you relay to Detective Hayes about the conversation you'd had with Chris?
All right, so I
that you felt
relayed
was
to
concerning?
Detective Hayes that I found concerning some of the things that had been relayed to me by Chris in that conversation. And my concern was based on not the fact that it was coming from Chris per se, but I was kind of concerned about, okay, this is early in the investigation, so where is this information coming from? It seems to me that, again, and you heard in the conversation, based on just common sense and somewhat limited knowledge about police investigations, I always thought that the investigators would hold things very close to the vest and not relay any information to anybody whatsoever, especially somebody like the deceased son who's on the property.
And that information was that he had relayed to you that a 38 was missing in the house, yes?
Yes.
And that a 38 special bullet was pulled from his father's.
I don't know if you said
father.
special. It was 38. Yeah.
38 was pulled
38.
from his father.
Yes. Yes.
And Detective Hayes said back to you, we don't even know the type of bullet involved in this case.
In that conversation he did, but he also said that, yeah, that the information was.
Said to you.
Well, but I,
unless
you know,
prompted.
okay, I got you. I understand.
Unless prompted.
That's all, Your Honor.
Anything else?
Just briefly, Judge. After speaking with Detective Hayes, you spoke with Chris, and then you realized what Chris had communicated to you to Detective Hayes. Is that accurate?
Say that again.
You spoke with Chris had called you, and then you relayed what you heard from Chris to Detective Hayes.
Correct.
And the information that Chris was telling you, you weren't sure anyone should know or would know.
Right.
Okay.
I
And
was
then-
simply relaying to Detective Hayes what had been communicated to me. That's all I was doing.
And then after speaking with Detective Hayes further, did you have any other concerns regarding that conversation?
No. No, I mean, no, I was trying to be very factually based in what I communicated to Detective Hayes. I knew that it was early on in the investigation. You know, I myself had just found out that this was a homicide investigation. And I was completely shocked by that because, again, you know, we all believed that Gary had suffered some type of heart attack or a stroke or something like that and had fallen over and burned up in a fire. And then we find out a day later that no, Gary was killed. He was shot. And so once I found that out, and after information had been relayed to me, I just thought it was important to tell the detective what people had told me,
Thank you.
especially because it was just right there, the 5th.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Anything else?
No, Your
All right, you can sit down. Thank you, sir. All right, call your next witness.
State calls Eric Durlacher. Yes. Mr. Durlacher, if you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may have a seat. And if you could please introduce yourself to the jury.
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Durlacher.
Mr. Durlacher, what is it that you do for a living?
I'm a lawyer.
Where are you a lawyer?
I'm a lawyer with Burr and Foreman.
What kind of law is that?
We're a full service commercial law firm with offices throughout the Southeast.
How long have you been with Burn Foreman?
25 years.
Did you have the opportunity to know Gary Farris?
I did. I worked with Gary. Gary Farris hired me at Burr and Foreman.
When was that?
I started March 1st, 1999.
And do you work here in the Atlanta office or somewhere else?
I work in the Atlanta office.
Mr. Durlacher, could you please tell the jury when you first heard about Mr. Farris's remains being discovered?
Sure. It was July 5th. I was at work and I heard the news from Angela Phillips, who works in my office. She was upset, and myself and another attorney in my office took her into a conference room to talk to her. And that's when we heard that Gary's body was found on the burn pile.
Can you tell the jury about your relationship with Gary?
Sure. We were friends. We were co-workers. Like I said, he hired me. He trained me. So we worked closely together for a number of years, and I owe a lot to who I am as a lawyer to Gary.
Would you all share personal information about your families to each other?
Small talk. We would talk about our families, what's going on with kids. My kids were younger than his, so he could be a source of wisdom, having gone through it before. But that was about it.
Can you tell the jury, please, about when you found out that Gary was in fact murdered?
It was sometime after July 5th. I can't remember the exact date, but I can remember it was in the context of that a bullet had been found in his rib.
Who was it that told you that information, that relayed that to you?
I can't remember who exactly told me that.
Was it someone from the family or somebody else, like law enforcement?
Just going back, I can't remember if it was someone from the family or law enforcement. I talked to both a good bit during those early days.
Who did you communicate with from the family?
Around that, what I'll call early to mid-July period, I had a number of conversations with Melody Farris, and then I had one conversation with Amanda Farris.
Tell the jury about your conversations with Melody Farris during that time in July.
Sure. We had an early conversation. Melody, in fact, might have reached out to me as returning a phone call that I had placed just to see how everything was going. I'm just trying to think of exactly what we discussed, but it was whether they had heard anything about Gary, what was going on. And like I said, it was, I think that day, later that day that she and I spoke, and confirmation that Gary was found on the burn pile. And she also offered that there was no foul play involved.
When was that phone? Do you recall what date that phone call was?
Yes, that was later in the day on July 5th. I had spoken with Angela around midday, around noon. She had gotten the news from, I believe, from Amanda. And then later in the day is when I spoke with Melody.
Did you know anything about Gary's spells?
Yes, I knew some about those.
Did most of the people in the office generally know that he would have those moments?
A number of us did, yes.
Did you ever see him have one of those?
Not personally where I saw the spell as if you were to have one right now, but I was around when he was in his office. I knew he's laying down because he was having one.
And did you have a subsequent conversation with Miss Farris after that call on the 5th?
We had a few conversations. We had that first one on the 5th and a few after that. Police were at the house looking through things, had taken the phones. Once she had called me from a neighbor's house. I believe I even supplied her with the name of a criminal lawyer as well.
What was your relationship like with Melody Farris during this time?
Fine, I would say cordial. We didn't spend a lot of time with each other, but we would see one another at firm events from time to time.
Did she ask you any questions about Gary's finances or documents in the office or anything of that nature?
It came up in one of the calls in the context of she did not want anyone to come in to take papers or to go through any affairs, that she was reluctant to have Emily Farris or her husband come in and to do anything, so that her preference was that we wouldn't let anyone into the office.
That's something she expressed to you over one of the phone calls.
Correct.
Did she volunteer information about her whereabouts from the 4th or the 5th?
Yes. She had told me that they were at the lake, I believe all day on the 4th, that they hadn't gotten back until late, didn't think about seeing where Gary was until the next morning when the grandkids were asking where Big Daddy was. But she told me that's what the grandkids called Gary. And it was at that point that they realized he wasn't in the house, and that Chris and Scott went looking to try to find him. His phone and his keys were in the house, so they weren't sure where he was.
After the days following finding Mr. Farris's remains, did you speak with law enforcement as well?
I did.
And did law enforcement ever come to the office and gather documents from the office? Did your firm provide documents as well?
Yes, they came to the office. We met with them. We showed them where the office was. They requested certain documents from us, which we had our IT group help to download from the computer that could be sent to them.
At this time, Judge State would move to tender state's exhibits, Docket 1, 2, and 3.
No objection.
All right, they're amended.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Mr. Gerlocker, if you could please review these. I'm going to pull them up on the computer. Okay, I'm pulling up Docket 1. What is it that we are looking at here in State's Exhibit Docket 1?
It's a stack of papers that's entitled Current Elections and Beneficiary Designations. And when I turn the page, looks like the type of information that we have to fill out on an annual basis for enrollment in our benefit plans.
Benefit plans?
Yes, ma'am.
And are these Mr. Farris's benefit plans?
It says benefit plan enrollment, Gary W. Farris.
Okay, and these came from your office. Is that accurate?
Yes, I had requested these from HR.
And so these are benefits that Mr. Farris elected himself into.
That's correct. We have a pretty robust benefit plan at our law firm. And so you can buy additional, or you get a certain baseline, and then you have to fill out some information such as beneficiary designations.
And do the partners get additional options for benefits?
There's some additional life insurance that you can purchase. That's correct, both in terms of life, accidental death and disability, and long-term disability.
And does it appear that Mr. Farris elected into basic term life, accidental death and policy?
It does appear he paid the premium to opt into the optional accidental death and disability, and as well as the buy-up for the life insurance policy.
And then he also, it appears that he signed up for an optional accidental death at
Correct.
the bottom. Okay, we're going to move on. Let's see here. Okay, it's a little slow moving. Okay. This next page appears to be the beneficiaries of Mr. Farris's policies.
Yes, that's what it looks like.
Okay, and who is that beneficiary?
It appears there's one current beneficiary, and it's Melody Farris for 100% of the primary percentage.
This appears to be a summary of some sort for the previous year, maybe. And then-
It appears so. It looked like the prior page was the 2017 coverage. Looks like this page that you're scrolling through is the 2018 benefits coverage.
Okay. So you have to re-enroll into these benefits every year.
That is correct. I think it's in January, but once a year you have to re-up, even if you just want to keep the same coverage or to change.
And that's typically what people call open enrollment period.
That's exactly
And
right.
everybody does it at the last minute.
Correct.
Okay. Go to. All right. It appears that did your firm do the highlighting for the current information?
That I don't know.
Okay. This appears to be when Melody Farris was added as beneficiary in 2012. And then he edited his profile. All right. We will go on to the, whoop. So primary beneficiaries here under the profit sharing. Now, what is the profit sharing?
Sure. As a partner in the firm, we're all enrolled in the profit sharing plan where a percentage of the profits are put into the plan. And you can also go up to a statutory maximum each year with your own dollars, but regardless of whether you make contributions, so much of the profit of the firm will be put in on a quarterly basis for the benefit of all the partners.
And this states that the beneficiary effective date was April 10th, 2018, and it was Melody Farris. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Now I'm going to open Locker 3, which is sort of a nice little summary of what we were just looking at. This was provided by your firm as well.
That is correct.
And this breaks it down through your carrier of Lincoln Financial. And it appears to be Gary Farris's enrollment for each term life, accidental death, equity partner, the buy-up, and the optional. Is that true? Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay. So that just says how much each coverage is. And then this is a separate one down here. Is that accurate?
That's the profit sharing plan, and our custodian of record is Empower.
Okay. And so Melody appears to be the beneficiary of all of those as well.
That is correct.
Can you describe Mr. Farris's work ethic with the firm?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Gary had a sterling reputation in the legal community. I don't know if you've heard this already, but he practiced in an area that's called commercial real estate and worked with a lot of banks and financial institutions. He was incredibly intelligent, responsive, and very practical minded at the same time, which is always a unique combination of skills in a lawyer.
Would the individuals in your firm often work on holidays.
Yes,
Was he fairly prompt with responding to emails?
absolutely. To be a good lawyer, you have to be prompt in responding to clients.
Give me one moment. I want to go back to these numbers here and the amount of coverage. So for the term life, it appears to be 500,000. Then the accidental death, the group accidental death is another 500,000. The life equity partners, 400,000. So we're at $1.4 million, 1.4. And then the buy up is another 300,000. So that's 1.7. And then the optional accidental death is another 500. So that would be 2.2.
That's right. It looks about it to be $1 million of accidental death and disability. And then in terms of life insurance, it's, what would that be? 1.2.
That's all I have for you, Mr. Gerlocker. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Derlocker. My name is John Luke Weaver, and I represent Melody. I want to go back and talk to you briefly how do I turn? Megan, how did you turn this? Why it wouldn't be turned on the document. One thing we have definitely established in this jury is technology does not work. Thank you, Michael. Nothing works. Okay, right here, this highlighted portion, we're talking about something in 2012, and it looks like we've moved Ms. Farris from a contingent to a primary. Is that what that means?
That's what it says, yes.
Okay, so that means prior to that, she was not the primary beneficiary of any of his life insurance.
She would be a contingent beneficiary, which means if something were to happen, if one of the primary beneficiaries were pre-deceased, then the residual would go to the contingent beneficiary.
Did you have records, or did you know who was the primary prior to Melody becoming the primary in 2012?
I would assume our HR people have that, but
Okay.
I don't know that.
You don't know. But we do know that as of 2012, she was moved from the contingent to the primary.
That's what this appears to show. Yes, sir.
Okay. And I know the jury's loving hearing about all these numbers, but I've got one more question and I will sit down. Can you explain to me how the profit sharing system at Byrne Foreman worked, and what was Gary's percentage? We've never known.
Well, let's see if I can explain it. Yes, each year you can contribute so much of your own money. I don't know in this time period, but maybe it was up to, let's say 15,000. And then if you were 50, you can do a catch up every year of maybe an additional 5,000. And Congress sets that amount and it goes up each year. But then separate and apart from that, the firm will put so much money into the profit sharing plan. Pretty much an equal amount for all partners. So for example, my firm just made the third quarter profit sharing plan contribution. Today I got an email and it would have everyone's name and it would show the amount put in on a quarterly basis. And it's the same for each equity partner in the firm.
So they get every equity partner gets the same amount.
That is correct. And then on top of that, an equity partner can make an individual decision whether they want to contribute some of their own money. on a pre-tax basis.
Okay, that's all I have.
I have no more questions.
All right, you sit down. Thank you, sir.
Should I leave the exhibits here or hand them
Yes.
back?
Just, you can give them to Miss Frankie.
I'll take them. Thank you.
All right, call your next witness.
Judge, next witness is a little lengthy. You'll
It's just 2:30.
All right.
A little bit.
Dr. Goody. Sir. Yes, sir. I think ready to break? All right.
How long ago? I just had one with you, right? How long ago? we'll wait for you, or I'll send everybody back out. All right, go ahead. Please court counsel this time. The state calls Dr. Alice F. Gooding. Dr. Gooding, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear affirm the evidence you're about to present in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Go ahead and have a seat. Thank you for being here today. Dr. Gooding, state your full name for the record, if you would.
It's Alice F. Gooding, Gooding.
Dr. Gooding, what is your title and what do you do every day when you're not in court?
I'm an associate professor of anthropology at Kennesaw State University and the forensic anthropologist for the state of Georgia at large.
And how long do you teach classes every day? Is that something to carry a full caseload, or how do you do?
Being a professor is my full-time job, except for classes canceled today.
Now, sometimes you do forensic skeletal recovery and analysis. Is that right?
That's correct.
How did you get into that? What got you to do that? Was it an interest you had in a young age, or did you pick it up later in life, or what got you into this type of work?
I wanted to be a medical doctor, but I didn't want my patients to talk back to me.
Fair enough. If you don't mind, just tell the jury your educational background through whatever degrees you have now.
I got my bachelor's in anthropology at Occidental College in Los Angeles, my master's in archaeological resource management from the University of Georgia, and my PhD in biological anthropology from the University of Tennessee, and I'm a board certified forensic anthropologist number 160.
And what is your doctorate degree in?
Biological anthropology.
And how many years total were you actually in a classroom or school setting?
After high school,
Yeah, so 4 years undergraduate, and how many years after that?
some quick math would be probably close to 10.
And how many people actually do what you do for a living? What you're testifying to today?
For reference, I am the only forensic anthropologist in the state of Georgia, so very few.
And how long have you been doing that here in the state of Georgia?
This is my 10th year.
Do you travel anywhere else for your job when you're an expert?
I have traveled, but only when the jurisdiction is in Georgia and the case is tried somewhere else.
Typically, just in a nutshell, what kind of things do you do in your line of work?
On the forensic anthropology side?
Yes. Mhm.
My responsibilities are to sometimes recover remains at a scene. In a lab setting, they are to analyze the remains, inventory them, and analyze the presentation in front of me.
To do your work outside just having the formal education, is there anything else that you do to have the skills and knowledge in order to be a forensic anthropologist?
I attend continuing education courses yearly, scientific conferences, do scientific work that's published in journals, and present at scientific conferences.
And what is a forensic anthropologist?
A forensic anthropologist uses skeletal biology to learn who someone was based on their skeleton and what happened to them.
And how do you go about gaining the knowledge and what you do trying to identify the skeletal remains? Is that a lot of, did you have not just book knowledge, but hands-on practical experience and training with that?
That's correct.
So tell the jury about that, how you learn to do your job.
A lot of my classes and training are hands-on in nature with case analyses, peer-reviewed reports, things where you get feedback on the physical work that you're doing.
I know you said there's not many people that do your job, but is there a branch of the science that you do that's related to what you do, but not necessarily your expertise, but it's kind of in the same area?
Biological anthropology is the larger subfield under which forensic anthropology falls.
And do you know how many people total in the United States do something similar to what you do?
Probably a couple of thousand.
Do y'all have conferences or any professional organizations that you're a member of?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. What type of things would those be?
I'm a member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the American Board of Forensic Anthropology, the American Association of Biological Anthropologists, the Georgia Academy of Science. I think that's it.
Have you ever been called upon, whether it's in some type of legal case or criminal setting or a trial setting, to give opinions, expert opinions in forensic anthropology?
Yes,
How many times have you been deemed an expert in our course? You know,
5.
just this time I tender in Dr. Goon is an expert in forensic anthropology.
No objection as to that.
All right. She's deemed to be an expert. As I've told y'all, she can testify to things that are, give her opinion as to things in her area of expertise. All right, go ahead.
Okay, we've got the foundation now, so let's talk about really when it comes to forensics anthropology. When I say forensics, what does that mean to you?
Forensics is a large field of different scientific subdisciplines like blood analysis, fingerprint analysis. My specialty is just the bones.
And when you combine that with anthropology, how does that in a practical sense come out in your everyday life? Do you work with law enforcement? Do you work with other agencies when trying to figure out what when the remains are found, what they are?
I work on a contract basis, which means when the Georgia Bureau of Investigation has a case that is primarily bones, the medical examiner will review it and then reach out to me to do an anthropological analysis.
Now, as a PhD doctor, you don't have a badge, you carry around a gun or anything like that, do you?
I do not.
Are you separate and independent of law enforcement?
That's correct.
If you go to a scene, you're working with law enforcement, do you have your own protocols and procedures that you follow to be objective regardless of what they do?
That's correct.
Would you have any problem whatsoever with telling law enforcement, stay out of my lane, or disagree with them when it comes to your science and what you do?
I do not.
But do you work well with law enforcement?
Absolutely.
Are you involved at all with training law enforcement or giving continuing legal education classes with law enforcement agencies and state workers in this area?
I do.
Do you work with crime scene investigators at times or teach them?
I do.
What type of teaching or things do you do with people like that? Is there anything that you do every year, or is it kind of just on when they need something, they ask you to teach it?
Every year at Kennesaw State University, we offer a training series for law enforcement, coroners, medical examiners, crime scene technicians, anybody in the medical legal field. We teach them to recover bodies from clandestine scenes, which is anywhere that you would not expect a body to be. And we cover the training from classroom all the way out into the field. So we have a field-based learning experience for them.
I would imagine, is it not at times that your objective when you're brought in as a scientist may be different from what law enforcement is trying to achieve at a scene? In the sense that scientifically, when you're not interested in per se catching a suspect or someone that did this, when you're called to this scene, is it kind of a very particular task they're asking you to do, or a very small part of their case?
That's correct. I have no, it's outside the scope of my science to be interested in perpetrators.
So you're not involved in the interviews with people or trying to identify suspects or chase people down or apprehend anybody. You're just really based on the location, the loci, what is there and the remains usually in a case.
That's correct.
Now, did you know the officers in this case that they took I believe a class of yours, and that's how they remember to call you?
Yes.
And I want to talk about case specifics in this case. Do you remember when you were called and what date that was?
It was July 5th, 2018.
Do you remember who called you or how you were called into the case?
Sergeant Shaw, I believe it's Cherokee County Sheriff's Office, probably placed a call or a text to me to request my assistance on a case.
How often during the year are you being called out on things?
Less so than I used to be. It used to be a couple of times a year, but I've out-trained myself a little bit. They don't need my help as much.
When you do this type of work, if you can just tell the jury, if you were called out, let's say you're just called out to any scene, what things do you take with you? First of all, how do you get there? Do you have your own vehicle? Do you have tools and things that you take to the scene? What's that like?
I have a personal vehicle, and I have a large trunk full of equipment and supplies that I bring myself.
Do you ever take anybody with you when you're doing scenes?
Sometimes I do.
I think in this case you had some interns or some people that were working with you, if you remember.
I don't remember if I I don't recall that I did, but I may have.
I want to look at a couple of dates in this case. I've got, and do you have a copy of your report?
I do.
Just this time, I'm going to tender evidence, Gooding 1 through Gooding 120, 120 exhibits.
All right. Any objections? All right, they're admitted.
I think you've got yours. I'm going to have these two. So they'll come up on the computer screen. All right, let's look to go through the case. I think July 5th of 2018, I believe you arrived at the scene at 2155 Purcell Lane in Cherokee County, Georgia, about 6:30 p.m. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then the other 2 days I want to go through I think you did the inventory and analyzed Gary Farris's remains. And we stipulated that it is Gary Farris's remains, so just want you to know that.
Thank you.
July 17th and July 23rd, 2018. Is that right?
That's correct.
So July 5th and then July 17th and July 23rd of 2018. When you go to a scene, I think you have certain methods that you follow in what you do. Is that right?
That's correct.
I want to ask you about, is it typical when you go to a scene, I think your report talks about there's a rake, screen, surface survey, and then a grid, and then you map and record, and then you do a recovery. Is that kind of the procedure that you do?
That's correct.
Well, what is raking? Is that the first step, or is there a step before that?
There is usually a just gross observation, meaning looking around. I would count that maybe as the first step. But then secondary to that, yes, would be raking up material in the surrounding area.
What is raking? What does that entail?
Can be using tools, including actual rakes like you would use for leaves, or hand raking, in which you use your hands to kind of scrape material together.
And that's just trying to find any remains or any evidence or items of interest.
Usually around the perimeter of what you have observed as the main site.
And here in this case, at the location, you're looking at a fire pit. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then after raking, you do a screening. What does that consist of?
Screening is when you use your eyes to visually screen the material that you've collected to see if there's anything of interest.
And after screening, I think you can do something called a surface survey.
That's correct.
And what is that?
That, again, using visual methods to look over the area and indicate, in this instance, using pin flags, which are small flags you may have seen near electrical lines or sewer lines, using those to flag or indicate areas of interest.
Once you figure out the location and the interested location, once you get it kind of surveyed, then you at some point do a grid. Is that right?
That's correct.
Tell the jury what a grid is. And in this case, I know it's going to be A, B, C, D, but what do you do there?
A grid is a cordoned off area that you've identified as of interest. So you put up stakes in some sort of rectangle or square shape, whatever is fitting for that situation. String up some twine to indicate that that area should be kept away from in terms of walking through or anything like that. And then I use a quadrant system where I divide the grid into 4 quadrants so I can keep track of what material comes from what area of the larger grid.
And then after you form that grid, I think there's procedures and there's a mapping and recording that takes place.
That's correct.
What does that consist of?
When remains are identified or other things of interest, items of interest, they are mapped. So they're measured from an X and Y. If you remember from maybe elementary school, an X and a Y on a graph, we can actually measure from each of those lines and come up with a coordinate or a point of the location of that material.
And Doctor, are you very systematic in this process? Is it a slow and deliberate process at times?
It is.
And does it take quite some time?
It does.
Do you remember how long you were at the scene?
Approximately 6 hours.
And then finally, I think you get to the recovery of remains. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what does that process look like?
The recovery of the remains is usually done by only a select few people to limit the amount of traffic through that cordoned off area. The human remains in this case would have been removed and set aside, and then the debris from underneath them removed and screened until no more human remains were recovered.
Is it kind of like peeling an onion? You just go down and down and down and down, or scraping different surfaces until you find no more remains?
Yes, that's correct.
And after you go through the physical ground and layering, if you would, then you do an inventory and a session or an analysis, is that right?
In the laboratory setting, yes.
So July 5th, you do all the steps up to the recovery. And then after that, from July 17th and July 23rd, that's when you do the inventory and analysis. Is that
That's
fair
correct.
to say? All right, let's walk through the photographs. And I probably will move pretty fast because I think a lot of these are going to be in already. This is Gooding 1. Tell the jury what this is and what significant it is in your case.
This is a map of the grid and the 4 quadrants, the A, B, C, and D, over the fire pit with the human remains indicated by those boxes that have the names of the bones in them.
So we have quadrant A, right top, quadrant B, bottom right, quadrant C, bottom left, and quadrant D, top left. Is that right?
That's correct.
Is it called the datum or datum?
Either's fine.
Just tell me how you call it.
I call it a datum, but that's because
Let's
I'm
go with datum then.
from around here.
My accent may call it something different. What is the datum?
A datum is the highest point of elevation. So in this map, it's listed as 0 inches. And then anything measured below that will be a negative number. So it gives you a sense of the depth, where the X and Y measurements gives you a sense of the location.
And directionally, north, south, east, west, would it be north be top? Is that what we're?
The north arrow on the left side of the screen is pointing top.
So
A little
this
bit of an
direction a
angle.
little bit.
That's correct.
All right. For the most part, though, north is up here, and then kind of as you look at it. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. Gooding 2, what is this here?
This is the fire pit scene, specifically quadrants A and B. A is on the top portion, and B is the portion of the picture that's closest to you.
Dr. Good, I'm going to go kind of fast through the photographs, but if you see anything that you want to talk about, just stop me and point it out, and we'll do that, okay?
Okay.
3, just another angle of this. 4, close up. 5. And 6, as we go through, these are just some of the things that you collected from the quadrants, is that right?
That's correct.
And at some point, I think it was described as an eraser, but the bullet in the ribs, tell us about that.
Yes, you can see it on the prior photo, number 6. And then the other side of that mass, the kind of orange colored, does look a bit like the end of number 2 pencil eraser, but that is a projectile.
When you first arrived at the scene, did law enforcement, did you know what you were dealing with at that time? I don't know if the bullet was found at the time you arrived or anything talking about that, or was it while y'all were actually processing the remains?
That's my hand and my photograph.
This is 9, 10. And I took this from your report, Gooding 11. What is this?
This is a diagram, a schematic of the front and the back of a human. And it shows the area from which the bullet was found in the remains in this case.
And it was, looking at this diagram, I think you talk about anterior to posterior. What does that mean?
Anterior is the front of your body, and the posterior is the back side of your body.
And you found the bullet to be going from anterior to posterior, is that correct?
That's correct.
Gooding 12, just some of this would be at the GBI, so not on the 5th, but on the days that you analyzed it, is that right?
That's correct.
Do you remember about approximately how much in weight the remains there were?
I don't remember if they were weighed. And if they were, that would have been the medical examiner.
Were there degrees, different varying degrees of damage or heat and fire damage upon the bones?
There were.
Tell us about that if you could.
When a fire burns unevenly, which is common to most outdoor fires as opposed to a commercial crematory oven, the fire will burn the body in an uneven manner. Human bodies are also uneven in the way that they're built in terms of where the fat and the muscle and the bones are. So in some areas that have very little fat and muscle and tissue, the high heat may burn right through to the bone. In other areas where there is a lot of muscle tissue, you may see that it's black and charred, but there might be some soft tissue remaining underneath.
When it came to this fire, did you find that the fire itself was I guess, a significant fire in the sense that it has not just one that just went up for an hour or so and then went out? Was it more significant of
I'll
a
object to that. That's outside her. About the fire in particular itself.
Judge, I think she's a forensic anthropologist. She can give an opinion about fire and the remains.
We also got another expert who's coming in just to testify about the fire, so I think it's that expert.
Ask her to what extent she knows, and then we'll go from there.
To what extent do you know about the size of the fire, the magnitude of the fire?
The only, within the scope of my knowledge, the only thing I can say about the fire is the temperature, which was taken at the site, and the consistency and presentation of these remains are consistent with a fire of about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is listed in the report.
All right, in your report, there was a actual measuring temperature of the center of the pit, is that right?
Yes,
And what was the degree in Fahrenheit that you found this to be?
230 degrees.
And
That
you
was, sorry, that was by fire personnel, not myself.
Right, but that was the measurement, 230 degrees Fahrenheit?
That's correct.
And would that have been taken prior to your arrival or sometime when you arrived?
It was noted that it was there, taken when I was there.
And then dealing with, I'm going to come back to this, but based on the objection, when it comes to thermal damage, you opined about the charring and black discoloration was observed throughout the present skeletal remains. Is that right?
That's correct.
And based on that, what was your conclusion?
That the remains had been burned.
And you said that these characteristics are consistent with the fire reaching what level in Fahrenheit again?
About 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
As you pulled the physical remains from the fire, did you notice that it appeared to be burning more so in one location of the grid as opposed to other locations?
The majority of the remains and the burning was taking place in quadrants A and B.
So top right, then bottom right. Is that correct?
On one of those prior pictures, correct.
When you're piecing together the remains, and I'm sure as an expert, you quickly can realize certain pieces of bones or certain things, but how long does it, in the condition that you found these remains, how difficult was it to analyze and figure out what exactly the bones that you could determine to be?
Would have taken a couple of hours.
And how do you do that? Is it visually or do you do microscopes or how do you?
It's a visual observation.
Is there any reason that there will be some bones that are more intact than others that you found in this case?
Again, that has to do with the amount of muscle and fat and skin that's over the remains. It's harder for the heat to get to them. For some areas that have less tissue or the fire isn't as hot in that area, you may see some more fragmentation.
And we see here that when you go through and take pictures, you're putting like bones to like parts. Is that how you organize them?
That's correct.
Here we're looking at Gooding 53. What is this a picture of?
This is a picture of the block of burned tissue and a portion of the ribs and the projectile found within them.
And then 64, is that just the projectile from the ribs?
That's correct.
And when you were able to gather remains of head bones and things like that, did you try to piece it back together to see if there was any injuries or anything you could locate?
Yes, I tried to reconstruct the bones of the cranium or the head as much as possible.
And here, Gooding 96, is that what we're seeing?
That's correct. This is the left side of the top portion of the cranium.
And why do you try to reconstruct cranium?
The objective is to see if there's any other sort of trauma to the cranium that the fire may have obscured.
Typically, do you find in cases like this that there are certain bones that remain, assuming there wasn't a disruption to the bones, like something had broke the bones or something like that, but in a fire like this, is there a reason that you would find more of the bigger bones as opposed to other bones?
A lot of the bigger bones are encased in more of muscle and fat and tissue.
And you did find some soft tissue remains?
That's correct.
And you wrote a report, in this case, is that right, that we provide to the defense?
That's correct.
And did you share your findings that you had in this case with the GBI and the Dr. Atkinson, the medical examiner?
I did.
What I'd like to do is some questions about your report. When you were looking at the, when you're looking at the remains, did you find that there were other material in the burn pile besides just human remains? For example, burned trash, household debris, things like that?
That's correct.
Is there evidence that there was also wood or other material there in the pile?
Yes,
And were you able to sift those out and separate them?
they were separated from the human remains.
And the state of preservation for the materials that you found in this, what did they range from? In the sense of the charring or the powder substance? What level did you find that they consisted of in the burn pit itself?
In the pit, you saw different colors, white, ash, blues, grays, black charring. So all different types of burning.
Out of all the remains that you were able to recover on scene, how did y'all transport those to the GBI to be analyzed?
That's a question for the coroner.
Did you get those, were they packaged in a certain manner, a certain number of body bags or a certain number of containers?
I believe they were packaged in brown bags.
I'm looking on page 2, your last paragraph before skeletal analysis.
3 body bags containing brown evidence bags and cardboard boxes.
And then when you did your analysis and did the skeletal inventory, I want to talk about the trauma analysis that you did. You have a section called perimortem trauma. Tell us what your finding was for this.
The perimortem trauma in this case was a minimum of 1 gunshot wound to the left chest from a front to back direction.
And you have I guess it's the Latin, the bullet was lodged in situ. And what is that?
In situ means in place or found as it was.
And what findings did you find for thermal damage in this case?
That the remains had been burned on a bonfire, excuse me.
Did you find any traumatic fractures of any?
Fractures were all indicative of the burning.
Any traumatic fractures observed on the cranium?
Of the burning.
And I think you noted when it came to the traumatic fractures for the cranium, I'm looking at your last sentence in thermal damage. What was that finding there?
No traumatic fractures were observed on the cranium aside from heat-induced damage.
So outside of the heat, nothing else?
Not that was observed.
You have a section for antemortem skeletal change and identifying characteristics. When you tell us you didn't have any findings of that, what does that mean?
Antemortem skeletal characteristics are those that you have on you in life that make you unique. For example, if you have a disease or you have anything that sets your skeleton apart from someone else's, that's where I would note that in the report, given the fragmentary nature of the remains and how burned they were. None of those characteristics were able to be noted.
And then looking on page 6 of 24 of your report, as you see on the screen there, you went through and I guess analyzed and then cataloged what you found, the remains that you found in each coordinate or unit. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is this just a listing of the things that you found?
That's correct.
And again, most things, so this first column here is Unit A and it's evidence bag 1, and then you list the things that you found there on the right side. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the next section is E2, which continues to page 7 of your report. And then E3, E4, and E5 in Unit B. So again, the most that you said were in accordance A and B.
Of human remains.
When you were processing this, how long did it take you before you realized that you were dealing with human remains at the scene?
Instantly.
I'm on page 16 of your report here. This is figure 11, I think. And tell us again, what are we looking at here?
We're looking at a top-down view of the section of burned soft tissue and ribs. I think I refer to it as a block of tissue in which the projectile is situated deep to the ribs, which means closer to the gut side as opposed to the skin side.
As we see in figure 11 here on page 16 of your report, Exhibit 120, is that how, when you were processing the burn pit, is that exactly how it looked in the way it was sitting in the pile when it was actually taken from there?
That's correct.
And then at some point, you then took that and it was, you were able to analyze that and then submit it to the GBI as evidence in this case.
That's correct.
Just have one moment. Did you only find the remains of one person?
That's correct.
Did you find any other bullets or things like that in the burn pile?
I did not.
Did you find any parts to a gun or anything like that?
I did not.
Did you find any metal outside of that, though? Just other things in the pile that did not burn that was metal?
I believe so.
Did you find any ropes or toe straps or anything else in the fire?
Not to my knowledge.
I have nothing else, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Dr. Goody. My name is Michael Ray. We met outside previously, right?
That's correct.
And I have a good bit of questions for you, but not too terribly many. First off, I want to know, how do you become the state forensic anthropologist? Like who gives you that job?
The chief medical examiner at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
Okay. So are you actually, because being a college professor, I think you said you're an associate professor?
That's correct.
Yes, that's where I graduated from. So that makes you're a state employee, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Now, are you serving, do you have basically just two state functions, one associate professor, two the state forensic anthropologist?
Correct.
All right. In this case, because I know you're testifying as an expert, a lot of times experts are paid. Are you
That's
compensated by the state additionally above your state salary for testifying today?
That's correct.
Okay. Were you compensated by the sheriff's office for coming out, ruining, your after the 4th and coming out and dealing with this case? Did they have to compensate you as well?
No, they did not.
They did not?
Not to my knowledge.
Just your testimony here today?
No, the analysis of the remains.
Okay, so let's back up. Let me ask better questions about that. So I'm assuming as the forensic anthropologist for the state, you get some type of small salary or some type of salary.
It's not a salary, it's a contract basis, so it's just an invoice per case.
Okay, invoice per case. All right, so basically, is it like an hourly rate?
It's based on the type of request. In this case, it was a trauma analysis, so there would have been a fee for trauma analysis.
Okay, so what would you classify what you did here? Because you did a lot more here, you know, getting the bones out of the burn pile, doing the trauma analysis and all that. So what would you classify what you did here?
A recovery and an analysis.
Okay, what were you paid for the recovery and the analysis, if you recall?
I believe at that time, I think $100 for the analysis and maybe $250 or $280 for the recovery.
Okay, that's in total.
Well, that would be maybe $380 in total.
Okay, that's what I meant. That's
Yes.
not like your hourly rate. That's total what you.
Yes,
received.
yes,
Okay. On top of that, your state salary with being an associate professor.
correct.
I'm gonna slide over. There's a sticker here that says "Don't stand here." So. Okay. All right. So first off, just so there's no confusion, because we had Dr. Atkinson testifying yesterday. You're not a forensic pathologist, correct?
That is correct.
Right. And the difference, partly in that, is a forensic pathologist is a medical doctor.
That's correct.
You are not a medical doctor.
Correct.
You are not able to certify cause or manner of death.
That is correct.
Now, I'm trying to figure out a good place. Well, we'll just start with your report. In your report that Mr. Fogus was going over with you, you had stated perimortem trauma.
That's correct.
Right? Perimortem trauma being before or just after death.
Perimortem trauma is at or around the time of death.
Okay, at or around. Are you familiar with hemorrhaging?
Yes.
Okay, because I asked Dr. Atkinson yesterday if he could prove to a medical certainty whether or not Gary was alive or dead when he was shot, and he said he could not. So my question to you is, how can you use the term perimortem trauma just before or just after death when you can't prove to a medical certainty he was even alive?
That's why it's at or around the time of death. So that could be a pretty wide scale.
No, I mean, I wouldn't say around the time of death. Somebody's been laying there 2 or 3 days, right? You couldn't tell the difference from your examination, right? In a situation like this where their body's been burned.
In this situation, I would still classify that as perimortem trauma.
Okay.
Because the projectile was on the gut side of the bones.
Okay. So if it was on the gut side of the bones, what internal organs did the bullet impact?
That I cannot testify to.
Okay. So you can actually say that it went into the body cavity.
That's incorrect.
That's incorrect?
I can say that it went into the body cavity.
Okay. Then, yet again, what did it hit?
That I cannot testify to.
Okay. But your testimony here is that your opinion that it's inside the body cavity.
That's correct.
Okay. And the bullet went in front to back.
That's correct.
Okay. So if I got shot right here, and actually, let me show you number 11 and ask you this way. You actually don't know where that bullet is in 11, correct?
It's in that range of brackets.
Yeah, but I'm asking, I want to know specifically, where's that bullet? You don't know.
That's correct.
Okay. So, but it's your testimony, even though you don't know where it is, it's your opinion that it is on the gut side of the rib.
That's correct.
Okay. But yet again, you can't tell me anything that it hit.
That's correct.
I'll move on, Judge. Now, generally, as an anthropologist, you would deal typically with bones, correct? And not soft tissue?
That's correct.
I hate not having it printed out. I'm sorry. You also stated in your report that you thought it was anterior to posterior. That would mean front to back, right?
That's correct.
I mean, so it's your opinion that if Gary was shot, that whoever shot him was standing in front of him? Or a bullet had to come from his front, right?
I would agree with the second version of your statement.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about what you know about. Now, as an anthropologist, do you typically see gunshot wounds in your cases?
Can you repeat the last word you said?
I said gunshot wound. As an anthropologist, like how often have you encountered gunshot wounds in your cases?
Oh, maybe 40 to 50% of the cases.
Okay. Well, how many cases have you worked? Because there's so few of y'all. So how many did you work this year?
I don't know. I know the total is over 160.
Since when?
2014.
Okay, so in 10 years, you've done 160. So that's 6 a year?
I think our math is adding up.
Okay, so, and then you said about half of those have gunshots? So
Yes.
Seeing 3 a year?
Sure.
Okay. And are those bullets, are they in bone or you're finding them around skeletal remains?
Both. I've seen both.
Okay. Now you would agree, based on your job, because you talk to the medical examiner a lot, right?
I do not.
Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead and jump in. Do you know that Dr. Atkinson copy and pasted your version of gathering the remains into his autopsy report?
Yes.
Verbatim.
Yes.
Okay. You would also agree with me that Dr. Atkinson never went to Purcell Lane.
I don't know that.
Okay. Did you see him there?
No, not while I was
Okay.
there.
Did you see him taking any of the photographs?
Not while I was there.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that in just a minute. All right. So what type, as an anthropologist, expertise do you have in gunshot wounds?
To bone, quite a high level of expertise.
Okay. So, but you didn't see any of that here in this case. At least I can't find it in your report. Like any damage to bone from a bullet.
That's correct.
Okay. So we got no damage to bone from a bullet. You put the skull back together, there's no damage to that. Right,
That's
except
correct.
for thermal damage.
That's correct.
And when I say there's no damage, universally there is thermal damage. Okay?
That's correct.
All right. So how about mapping trajectory of wounds? You got any skill and expertise in that?
When it relates to bone, yes.
Okay. And we already talked about that. Now, you don't have any entrance wound to examine, correct?
Not in bone.
Okay. Well, I mean, in this case, you didn't find any type of entrance wound. You just found a bullet lodged in soft tissue.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, let me ask you too before I forget. Who, because I've asked everybody, who found the bullet?
To my recollection, it was me, but there were a good number of people peering over my work.
Okay. While you were working around this time that you find the bullet, who's there with you?
I can't give you a full inventory.
I'll name you some people and you tell me if you remember they were there. That'd be easy. Was Sally Sims there?
She was on scene.
Okay. But you don't remember she was actually in the burn pile with you?
I can't recall who would have been in the pile. At times, it would have been only me.
Okay. Do you recall handing the rib and the bullet to Sally Sims?
Couldn't recall who I would have handed it directly off to.
How about Officer Shaw? Do you recall him helping you at the burn pile?
He was present at the scene.
But you don't recall him helping?
I don't recall in
Okay.
what.
That's fine. That's fine. What about Detective Westwood?
I don't recall.
Okay. And because I know Mr. Focus had asked you, but yeah, you had an intern with you there too.
Okay.
I don't remember their name either.
Apologies.
It's not
to the
important.
intern.
I'm assuming they were a good intern. It's just been 6 years. Oh. Okay. I want to do a little comparison between your report and Dr. Atkinson's report, not verbatim comparison. So you had stated that, in your opinion, that the trajectory was front to back. And so, are you aware that in the autopsy, Dr. Atkinson has said that he was unable to assess any type of bullet path?
I wasn't,
Did you know that?
after reading his report.
Okay, so you found that out. You did read his report. You read Atkinson's autopsy
I have since this,
prior to testifying here today. You went and read
that's
it.
correct.
Okay, yeah.
I was
And-
provided with it.
And before he actually wrote his autopsy, you sent him a copy of your report,
I would assume so.
Okay.
Given that it's copied and
pasted into it. Yeah. Do you always do that? Send a copy of your findings to the medical examiner?
Actually send them to the director of medical operations, and she distributes them to the medical examiner that requested.
Okay. So what's the logic in that? Because shouldn't a medical, and I know you're not a medical examiner, but I'll ask anyway. Shouldn't their opinion and analysis be separate and apart from what your findings are?
Objection relevant.
Oh, well.
No. I think we're a collaborative medical team employed with the same office.
Okay, well, that's fair.
I think it's reasonable to, if a medical examiner requests anthropological analysis, I think it's reasonable that they rely on those findings.
Okay. Now, what if me? You know, when you try to organize everything so good, there it is. So in your report, all right, I get ahead of myself when I just start talking, then I got to scroll through and figure out where I am. So you stated like front to back, but the autopsy actually found here on, let me get to it. Past it. You stated that it was front to back, right? That's what your report found.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, but in the autopsy, they found that couldn't assess for an entrance wound. So if you can't assess for an entrance wound, how can you say it's front to back?
Based on the location of the projectile in the remains.
Okay. But you are aware that also bullets do have the ability that if they hit some type of object, they do have the ability to tumble.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So got some contradiction there. The autopsy also says that they're unable to assess a direction of a wound path, correct?
Is that D?
Yeah, section D.
I'm reading that, yes.
Okay. Okay. And yet again, you found no other evidence of any other, well, actually, you didn't find any other evidence, any damage to any other bone, correct? You found technically no evidence of any damage to bone other than thermal damage.
That's correct.
Okay. So no other bone evidence of injury from a bullet.
That's correct.
Okay. Or any other blunt force object.
That's correct.
All right. You also, you didn't offer any opinion in your report appropriately as to manner or cause of death.
That's correct.
Yeah. Now, moving on to the more fun stuff. I want to talk. I really like your grid, by the way. And so this is Gooding 1. And I also want to pull up Gooding 3, just so I can get an idea here. Okay, can you see both those, Gooding 1 and Gooding 3? Oh, no, you didn't. Can you see both those, ma'am?
I can.
Okay, that looks fine. All right, so here's just a couple questions based on this, okay? You've got up here on number 1, this is quadrant A, correct?
That's correct.
So, and then you've got the cranium where the skull was found. It's kind of on the line between A and, well, the line between A and B.
That's correct.
Because it's right here. So going over to Gooding 3, that puts it somewhere around, based on this, somewhere in this area here.
I would drop your cursor down and to the left a little bit.
You tell me when to stop.
Maybe over to the left just a little bit, right about there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. All right. So that's the skull. Also, what are the flags?
As I stated previously, the flags are part of the visual search when we identify areas of interest.
Okay, so it's like this flag may be like, hey, there may be something here, check it out.
That's correct.
Then I'm assuming when you checked it out and removed whatever was there, if it was evidentiary, then you remove the flag, like showing that that area had been searched.
Yes, but that wouldn't have been the order of operations.
Okay. All right. So we get so so we got the skull around here, and then the next thing, if we go down a little bit, the pelvis is let's say in here. Is that a fair assessment based on
Yes.
your diagram?
Yes.
Okay. But then we've got, I'm assuming rib here, the very bottom. That's the rib with the bullet and the soft tissue.
I don't know that to be true.
Okay. Well, where was
I'd have to go back and look at the inventory. Looks like the rib with the bullet was found in Unit A, evidence bag 1.
Okay. But from your diagram you did here, we don't know where the bullet in that rib was found. We just know it's quadrant A.
We do know where it was found in the rib.
In the what? I couldn't
In
hear
the
you.
rib.
No. Okay, no, where at in the pile in quadrant A? We don't have any documentation of that, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so we know it's quadrant A here, or I'm assuming here because this is the burned area, but we don't know exactly where.
Correct.
Okay, so we've got a rib down here. Let's see, femur and tibia. That's the front part of the leg and back part of the leg?
It's the top and the bottom part of the leg.
Oh, okay. Which one's which?
The femur is the thigh bone and the tibia is the shin bone.
Gotcha. Okay. So those are the 2 leg bones. And then we also have another femur and the pelvis, right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So any kind of issues as to why is there a lone rib bone down here at the very, very bottom? Any explanation on that?
My responsibility is mapping.
Oh, I'm not saying this is your fault. I'm just wondering if you know how it got there.
I wasn't concerned about that.
Okay. So, I mean, because it would seem anatomically out of place, right? A rib below the pelvis.
Sure.
Okay. That's my whole point right there. So nothing really to do with you. Okay. Already did that. That number. I'm just going to pull up your report because Mr. Fogus showed you something. I don't remember what it was. Okay, that's the part of the rib where you're saying it's on the gut side, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But yet again, going back to your anatomical drawing, you can't say where that bullet is in those ribs.
That's correct.
Okay. No further questions, Judge.
Thank you. All right. You can sit down. Thank you, ma'am. You'll have a short witness or?
please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
If you could, you can put your hand down now. If you could please introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Addison Farris.
Addison, how do you know Melody Farris, the defendant in this case?
She's my grandmother.
So which parent is she the mother of for you?
She's my dad's mother.
Addison, where do you live? Just the state. What state do you live in?
Other than Plymouth State, I live in Maine.
How long have you lived in Maine?
How long have I lived in Maine?
Yes, ma'am.
I think it's like 11 years now.
Before you lived in Maine, did you live in Georgia ever?
I don't think so. I lived in Florida before that.
When did you live in Florida?
From when I was really young, like 2 or 3, to when I was 7.
And does your dad live in Georgia?
Yes.
Would you frequently visit your dad when you were younger?
Yeah, we would do summers and Christmases usually in Georgia.
Addison, I want to talk about July of 2018, okay? Did you have the opportunity to come to Georgia to visit your father in July of 2018?
Yes.
Do you remember what day that you came to Georgia?
I'm not sure. I think probably, or I know it was around the time of the 4th of July, but I don't know an exact day.
Were you here before the actual 4th of July holiday?
Yes.
Where did you go when you first got to Georgia?
When the day that we got there, we dropped my sister off at her friend's house, and then we went to my grandparents' farm.
How old were you in 2018?
I was 11, almost 12.
And when you mentioned your sister, how old was your sister?
My sister would have been 13.
So she's older of the two of you.
Yes.
You mentioned that when you dropped your sister off, you then went to your grandparents' farm?
Yes.
Okay. And who did you see at the farm?
I saw my grandmother and my grandfather.
When you say we traveled to the farm, who is we?
Me and my dad.
Okay. Was anyone else with you too?
I don't think so, no.
Do you remember how long you stayed at the farm when you saw your grandparents that day?
It was a really quick visit. We just came to say hi and give hugs, and then we left. So probably like 15 minutes tops.
Okay, and I want to kind of orient you to the dates. That week of July, Monday was the 2nd, Tuesday was the 3rd, Wednesday was the 4th. Do you remember now which day that would have been?
I think that it was probably the 2nd then.
Okay.
Or no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Okay. So back in 2019, were you interviewed professionally by a forensic interviewer?
Yes.
Okay. And at that time, if you had mentioned to her that that was the day before the 4th of July, would that have been accurate?
Objection.
Yes.
She's trying to refresh recollection.
It's a little difficult on
I
Zoom.
know.
I'm happy to do that if you would like me to.
A second ago, she didn't know what day it was.
Go ahead. I'll give you some latitude, but you also can grab the calendar, put it on, show it to her. Now, when you try to do something on the screen, we don't have that technology available easily. That's part of the problem and part of my complaints about all this. So, now, you can do that by sharing the screen on the computer, but then we have to relog in that computer, and then we may lose. Sorry, I turned off my mic. We may then lose. We can log that computer in, and then you can share a screen from that computer, but we don't have it set up that way because I killed that connection to make sure we can get the sound working. So if there's something you need to show her, then we're gonna have to do that, which is okay. It's just gonna take a minute.
But the part of the problem is I have to do it too.
Well, you use,
Recording people.
well, you can,
We're
if
doing
we,
the same thing that we
right.
both have
uh,
from the internet. So probably best that we go ahead and figure out how to do it.
well, or we could, anyway, yeah, again, this is something we should have talked about before we tried it. Now. Tracy, come log this computer back in. If you can, let's see what happens. And we'll see how much longer we go before we give up and start over in the morning.
We're happy to send her whatever she needs to review, refresh, but.
We could, if you're gonna do that outside if we need to do that outside the presence of jury, we're gonna send them back while we're showing her. So y'all step back out for a minute. Now, when we do that, I'm gonna start all over and see if I can systematically. Because, I mean, I want to sit here and work on it for another 20 minutes, but then it's going to be 5:30 and then it's going to be too late for us to get anything done. So we're going to have her join us back after we test out the equipment and see if we can figure out where the gremlin is. With that, we're going to recess for the day. Reminder, tomorrow is Wednesday. So we're going to, right? We're going to break around 11:30 because I have a meeting with the folks about the new building. And so, but we're going to eat in, and so I'm going to eat my lunch while y'all are eating y'all's while I'm doing my video meeting with the other folks. And we'll break around 11:30. I've told them to have the lunch here about 11:15, and we'll go till 12:30-ish, depending on how long. They're pretty good about trying to keep that meeting to an hour. And then we'll get back going. And then again, our Thursday plan will be to break at noon for the rest of the day. So we will not have lunch here. Y'all will leave and go off on your own and not come back for the afternoon. All right. Again, remember everything I've told y'all about. Don't talk to anyone about the case. Look up anything about the case. Don't Google the internet about anything about the case or anyone related to the case or anything that might cause a hit. All right. Judge blows up about technology. That would be a good thing to look up. All right. Y'all can be excused. Thank you.
It's Cherokee County Sheriff's.
Tell us about that if you could.
I hate not having it printed.
Justice served in an honest fight. True crime tales till the verdict's right. Solving more than just trivial quests, where sentences rule at the defense rests. Justice served in an honest fight. True crime tales till the verdict's right. Solving more than just trivial quests, where sentences rule and the defense rests.